together today. So there might be some, little tweaks and things we can add to it. And yeah, if there's just like, I just want to be like, I want to have the presentation be an opportunity to generate conversation is essentially where I'm at. So anyways, Sydney, I'll pass it back to you. I don't know if you have more intros or things you want to
Yeah,
start off with, but I just wanted
I'll
to.
go ahead and start us off. I do think it'll be a small group today. I think we'll probably get a couple more. So Hannah, I'm sorry about that. I didn't do good math on this. Um, so anyway, for those of you who don't know Hannah, she has a background in consumer packaged goods and has done a lot of work both as an entrepreneur and then also with the Oregon Department of Ag and was a part of developing that. I don't know if you all remember what is it called? It's called the roadmap. Um,
Yeah.
the Food Makers Roadmap, which we'll drop into the chat as well. So on our last call, we had Oregon Department of Ag, and a lot of questions about processing came up. A lot of questions about the life cycle of a processed product came up. And so I reached out to Hannah and said, Hannah, please help us. We don't know. We don't know what we don't know. And so we'd love to hear from you. So Hannah's put together a presentation for us, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end.
Yeah. And there's that roadmap if anyone doesn't know
Oh,
about it.
thanks, Hannah.
Yeah. And I just want to say, yeah, this is pretty like narrowly focused, the presentation I'm going to share on packaged food products, mainly ones I've seen that are like coming from farmers or in that, locally grown sphere. Um, but there's other opportunities sort of outside of that. And I have a lot of resources around co-packing. There's another kind of call I've given around this topic. So if anyone is ever curious, reach out. But let me get it going. This has been fun. I've gotten to shamelessly plug our farm and some friend farms too, and then also some pics from touring some food hubs and going around the state in the last couple of years. So we're going to talk about processing, and I really put this in a like easiest to hardest. And these are a couple of products we make on the farm here because I think that's an opportunity. So anyways, I'll go into that. But what is co-packing, just to ground us all first? It's where you're making a product under contract for a client. And why it's relevant, right, is there's the cottage food laws that allow some things to be made as a farm. And then there's other things that are not allowed. And that's going to be a big distinction I go through in this presentation. And so is there an opportunity for a food hub to make something for a farm? Or even if they scale up that, you know, item they're making at their farm and they're just hitting a capacity of constraints within their home kitchen, maybe there's an opportunity for a food hub. And so there's two really common models or two like kind of sides of the model and then somewhere in between. But tolling is the idea and concept that a farmer would provide the ingredients and the kitchen would do the processing. And so you'd either charge per unit processing or a batch processing, like, hey, I'll do a batch, whatever we get out of it, it's this X amount. So that would be like one model. And in that model, usually the client is also providing labels and packaging, the far end. And then turnkey in the industry is the co-packer is sourcing all of the ingredients, all the packaging, all the labels, everything. And then hybrid would be somewhere in between. And I think kind of what an interesting model for a food hub to consider would be holding a certain type of packaging. The farmer provides the ingredients. The labels are, with a third party made, or you could even get a label machine where you have a really simple, basic label that you can print out on the fly for a customer. And that, wouldn't be very nicely designed, but that could be, you could have tiers of that. And so there's like holding less cost involved in that, right? If you're not having to buy too many ingredients. Um, and that's just sort of in like exchange. And then it goes right back to the farmer, right? No one's having to hold that the kind of, well, I guess the farmer is, but the cash of that in that same way. I think could be the interesting model. Let's see here. So I just want to like start out with some of the things I'm seeing as farm direct products that and the opportunities I see there, because I think that like as farm direct has been expanded and people grow to, the minimum, there's this, like, what do they do when they get that product gets super successful? This is one of my favorite ones. It's a fermented chili flake that's dried after a hot sauce has been made from a farm in the Rogue Valley. And so just like naming off a few and put some other ones in the chat for the ones I've missed, herbal teas, herbal salts, garlic powder, chili powder, freeze dried berries. I have blueberries, all the blueberries, the berries. Uh, Hot sauce, ferments, kale chips, I've heard about. Don't actually know totally illegal in there, but I think they just fall under dehydrated. And hazelnut coconut chocolate spreads, I've seen at a bunch of markets, and then jams and preserves. The opportunities, like I've been talking about, are like highly seasonal crops, crops where there's excess, bumper crops, end of season processing, and then this idea of like scaling up from under farm direct. And yeah, mushroom jerky. Yum. Yeah, dehydrated mushrooms. I think I have a pic from your food hub of that too. So let's start at the lowest barrier, which is dehydration. And that isn't, it's allowed under farm direct, right? But it's can be space intensive. This is a picture of a farm friend of mine that actually makes body care products, which we're not really talking about today. And then there's also a picture of some tea we make here on our farm. And it's very small batch and people love it. But what happens when we're, either like we want to scale up and there's capacity reached. Is there again an opportunity, or like for larger dehydrators, what we're learning to share more personal experiences, just that our like we little Excalibur dehydrator, it just doesn't make sense for it. And we've done more like racks in a room with a dehumidifier instead. Um, but I think it's pretty cool because you could offer this as a service. It could even be like an hourly service, and then the bulk product can go back to a farmer, or a mixed product, or um, a refined finished package product. And it's very you don't have to follow strict recipes like you'll see for other products. So we get a lot of more flexibility in what's being made. You could do some on the fly, like herbal salt blends or something like that, with what's available, what the farmer has at that time. There is a lot of like high touchness with like herbal processing, hands involved in that. I think there's some ways to get it a little bit more efficient. And then sort of the key risk to be aware of is just moisture retention, making sure it's really dehydrated and there's no mold, and you could use like a moisture wicker inside of it. Um, Lower barrier product. Yes, Sydney, I will. So, um, gosh, how do I say that? I mean, just like ease of making under agreement with someone, that there's not as many regulatory barriers. So I'm thinking about it as from a regulatory standpoint, that it's a little bit more flexible. These ones I'm going to talk about sooner, and then it gets less flexible as you go on. And essentially the max would be an acidified food where you're required to get a process authority letter to make that for every single recipe, for every single kitchen, every single process type. And so that is the highest barrier. Does that answer the question, Sydney?
Mostly, I think I have maybe a part B to that
Yeah.
question, which is, um, and maybe it's like as you go along, if you could also talk about like, if you know this answer, how high a barrier it is for, say, the food hub to get their kitchen
Oh, yeah.
licensed. So
Totally.
there's sort of two sets of barriers, just the regulatory and then what that means for the actual equipment and management in the kitchen.
Yeah, and I wasn't thinking about it as much from that perspective, but definitely still on level. So like you do need to have your 3 compartment sink and hand wash sink floor drains pretty much no matter what you're doing. But for dehydration, for example, right, you wouldn't have to get a hood installed or burners, right? The level of investment in equipment and infrastructure. Dehydrators could be expensive. I mean, that might be a, defer, pop in Kim and see. I know she has one that she's been looking at and see what the cost is there. But in terms of like facilities, infrastructure, you don't need quite as much. And actually, I would say next slide is fermentation. Fermentation, you need really quite very little in terms of equipment. You do need space and vessels and time, right? Because it can be, unless you're doing really quick ferments, there's the long fermentation time. So where is that getting stored? And I think something for everyone to consider while they're going along this is like, what's my kitchen equipped for? Do I have a really small kitchen, but I'm able to, get a kettle, and I already have a hood? Cool. Maybe I can do some like in and out batch processing and it, gets off. Or do I have like a really big warehouse, but it's really simple and I think I could probably find a 3 compartment sink off, you know, off Craigslist. And luckily there's already a really basic floor drain kind of thing. And kind of we're talking in the bare minimum. As you get up, go up the scale in terms of food safety systems, there are a lot more regulations for a business, but I'm not really talking about that because it's pretty high financial minimums that you're going to have to be working with. And it's really with businesses that want to do some pretty major wholesale business. But the opportunity again here for a farm is that, oh, they could sell wholesale maybe to their a couple of local co-ops um, and expand their reach a little bit more when they're made in a commercial kitchen that's certified by the ODA, which has more accessible food safety regulations than some of these third-party audits that come into play when you're growing and scaling a food business. And so if anyone has questions about that a little bit more, um, we can get into that. And yeah, Sandra, I actually have pickled veg as an acidified food, as vinegar pickled, as an acidified vinegar pickled and like canned shelf stable as an acidified food, fermented pickles. So this is where pickle, like I always, whenever someone's selling pickles, I'm like, is this a fermented pickle or is this a vinegar pickle? And that's where you get the difference. So this would be a fermented process and held refrigerated. There's no heat involved. And that's the difference with fermentation. It's allowed under Farm Direct and again, it's the you need cold storage and then also glass is expensive. That's sort of a consideration here. But yeah, I'll get up to acidified and then maybe we can even jump back through these different ones and jump around for other questions. So freezing, I think, is a really interesting one. I haven't seen anyone offering this service. I do know of a farm that I won't say that is freezing at home, even though that's not allowed. And they're just trying to figure it out for their business. They have a berries, pretty highly seasonal crop. A lot of people obviously do. Yay, Carrie, you're doing it. I didn't know you were doing freezing too, so that's great. But of course, like if you're doing freeze drying, you got to do, freezing can be a part of the step. Yeah, I really welcome Carrie, if you want to like jump in on this at all, please
Sure.
do.
We're just starting really simple as we launch into this year's mostly focused on fruit. We're just converting them to freeze pops, like Otter Pops. It's just pureed fruit that we didn't sell whole, but to prevent it from going bad, we're just processing it and freezing it into little like Otter Pop tubes, and then we pop them in the freezer. That's it. Super simple.
That is super cool. And I really like your product innovation because it's unique. And then also, you're not going to have to deal with freezer burn there or things clumping together. That's so one thing, one little pathway I went down on the last couple of years is exploring like, could a food hub or like a food bank do the IQF, get an IQF equipment, do the individually quick frozen, which uses nitrogen to really quickly freeze berries and vegetables so they don't smoosh together in the freezing process. You can do that on trays too. Um, but it's what the result of all of that was is that the actual like nitrogen tank is so expensive. The whole scale of it, of the machine, is so expensive it doesn't make sense for even medium scale farming. So it's just like, throw that out the window. So you're solving for that by the pureeing, which is really neat.
Hey, could I chime in real quick? Because I'm like seeing this thing that we're like Carrie, if you've got freezer and freeze drying actions happening down in your neck of the woods, and Bohemia is installing infrastructure over the next year and a half to hold the space of fermented products and dried products. We just got the harvest saver and we have the kettle. But if each of us hubs is kind of like poising ourselves to become a processor for that thing, right? And then and we have a trade network going, then we can get produce at the end of the year, or it's, stuff that needs to get processed over to its like processing hub that specializes in that thing. Like if we organize, right, if we organize as we're moving forward in poising to be these small scale co-packers, it's kind of
I love,
cool.
I was trying to find my like high fives emoji.
Oh, yay. I have a hard time finding those too. It's nice to see you, honey. I'm glad you're doing this.
Thank you for being here. Yes, totally, right? I mean, specialized and the next slide is freeze dried. And one of the examples, I was actually trying to find a picture of it before jumping on, is one of our local blueberry farms is making a freeze dried blueberry and little market, research. The package didn't make it home because my daughter and her friend devoured it, right? So that's an exciting product, maybe good turns on that one. But they worked with a candy co-packer that's doing freeze-dried candy already and already has the infrastructure and then got, did some berries for them on the side. And so, where is that already happening or where is it not? And I do think, dehydration is a really interesting one. I know the blue, not Blue Evolution, but the Oregon seaweed folks have been trying to find seaweed dehydration for a really long time. So, um, sweet. Trays for freezing, Kletskanae Farm Collective. Yeah, this is so good things happening in the chat. Collaboration, freezing. Like I would love to, if you want to send me any photos, email or text, include them or have them unlock for later. I think freeze drying is really interesting. It's like this new thing that people are getting into, and there's some hype around it. But what I'm learning is it's small. And Carrie, I'd love to hear from you as well. But it's we try to install one on the farm and we don't have the electrical capacity for it. So that's like our kind of key barrier. And so is your facility ready electrically? And then they're really small. Like so the unit, the home commercial units are like they're size of a two people or whatever. But then the actual space that you're processing in is smaller than half the size of a dehydrator. So and it can be a long process. And so, what is your kind of best bet of freeze drying, and how are you able to run it consistently? But it is something that then you're getting a really long shelf life. It's light and shippable, and people love it. It's crunchy for kids. So yeah, Carrie.
Yeah, we're just getting going with our freeze dryer. We got the medium one, so it's over 200 pounds though. It's only has 5 trays, but still it's kind of astonishing what you can fit in there.
Cool.
But now that we've got it up and running, we're kind of like today we had leftover broccoli and cauliflower that was starting to bruise, and we thought we could process it through the freeze dryer, but it's not going to sell very well that way. It would sell better if we could actually create some kind of like broccoli rice casserole and then package it that way for rehydration as a meal. But then that takes you into another whole level of food processing. So
Yeah,
it's
it certainly
almost
does. And recipe development as well, right? Is that
exactly. So it's almost better to just dehydrate it or freeze it. At that point, you kind of have to think of the path that you're going to sell it through before you process it.
I love that advice. Like, what are you gonna sell it through? I did see, and I think I've shared this on a hub call before, but there was a really cool winter CSA that I was a part of back when I was in college in New York that worked with a local freezer processor. So they had a commercial kitchen, and then they chopped and froze all this veg for the winter time, and you got these really highly efficient little veggie cubes that you could make like soups and stir fries with. And yeah, I thought it was really amazing as a consumer, but it was definitely an expensive product to buy. But that's where like maybe the CSA model works. In terms of freezing, Rose, I'm sort of with you. I'm like, well, why can't that be allowed? But it's that if there is any, you know, contamination, bacterial, anything that might be on that berry from birds to whatever, right? From farms, the freezing process doesn't kill that. There's no kind of kill step in freezing, so it's just retained there. And which is, kind of ironic with the freeze drying. And I think that's and I'm definitely not an expert in this zone, and so I may be like speaking over myself, but yeah, I think like if the freeze, like it'd be interesting to consider like if the frozen product was, that the recommendation was you need to cook this in a pie or something like that. Like this gets put into a soup and it's heated at home. That might, solve something. But yeah, and to Sydney's recommendation to just connect with the ODA and talk about that.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And yeah, welcome more people to jump in. Um, so jams and preserves, I mean, this is sort of, tried and true, and you can see that, right? Like freeze drying is really new, and I think our master preservers, our, food safety, they're trying to catch up with it. They're trying to learn about it. Preserves actually can be pretty, this is like in the medium barrier section where there's a lot of pre-approved tested recipes already out there that you can access through OSU or other organizations that are extension agencies. And if you're working with one of those, you can make it without because most berries and fruits are on the lower pH side. It doesn't necessarily have to be, acidified. I mean, obviously lemon juice is acidifying, so I think there's a little bit of gray zone, but they're also really high in bricks. It's this complex thing that, is most ideally explained by a food scientist. But essentially, you're able to make it without a process authority letter using one of these approved recipes, but you do need to have equipment that's ready to do it. You could have big stock pots on a stove. Maybe ideally you have kettles and fillers. It's a little bit higher scale, but I do know of a jam co-packer that works directly with farms in the Portland area that has big stock pots and a very like simple one head piston filler that's run pneumatically on so it's like air pressure run. So you could get relatively simple equipment for that, or you could be really, really, really small still and just hand fill with one of those funnels like someone would kind of do at home. And yeah, and I think just within thinking about fermented foods, thinking about um, anything jarred, glass is really expensive and takes up a lot of space. And so that's just the kind of consideration that you want to have, like Kim's space with a really, with her pallet racking could be good for glass because she can bring in a whole, in her or her client can bring in a whole pallet of glass and it gets stored there. But do you have that storage that you can get a reasonably priced glass for your clients and products in that? And that kind of brings us to acidified foods, which also a lot of them you can do plastic, a specific kind of plastic that can be heat processed. So if you're working with a packaging supplier, you need to communicate that. It's usually like the number fives. And but mostly glass is what we see and probably what a consumer would want if they're buying something from a local farm. And so yeah, so this is where like the example I really love here is this case study, and I have it mentioned at the bottom, is Preserve Farm Kitchen was this co-packer in Sonoma County that worked with the area farmers there and made primarily preserves, and they had a commercial kitchen, kettles, and then a lot of tomato sauces as well. And the tomato sauce process, what they had done, and I just thought was really savvy, is they got the process authority letter pre-approved for their kitchen, for their equipment. These are the critical things, is that you will develop a very specific process for if you have stock pots, if you have kettles, what size is the kettle, right? How you're filling it, even what the filling equipment is, because if you put 200-degree liquid in a filler and it, takes so much time to go through the filler, if it's an ambient filler, and then it gets into the jar at 180 degrees, or, there's like heated fillers, that's a whole other level, but like, just they are very specific with these process authority letters that it's to your kitchen, what you're actually doing. Are you taking in raw produce? Are you using cans? What is that actually like? And then approving that actual unique recipe that you made. So you have to send in finished product samples, they test it, and then they sign off on the letter. And so this is that higher barrier process, but also where you see a lot of co-packing because of that higher barrier. And the person in charge needs to have, and I should have added this, but they need to go through the Better Process Control School and learn how to take the logs that are associated with processing a product like this. And so every product needs a batch number, and you have time and heat logs that you're taking throughout the process. And then there's a specific, oftentimes, heat and hold process at the end. So for example, a kind of hot sauce product that we did at Community Co-Pack, we would actually fill the bottles hot, flip the bottles upside down, put them back in the case, and then they would hold to like really seal in that heat and pasteurize that environment. And that was a critical part of the process for that product. And so this is where you know, having someone who is a production chef on your team, someone who's really ready to track track. I'm kind of like overemphasizing the food safety stuff on this one because this is where, and this is why it's highly regulated, is where botulism can come in, because it's an anaerobic without air space that botulism grows in, and it can kill people. So that's why it's highly regulated. And you know, these other lower barrier ones, folks, you know, there's air in there, it's just not at risk for um for botulism specifically. And then there's listeria and a few others that they watch out for, but botulism's that really kind of danger zone one. But good food safety practices are important and amazing throughout, no matter what you're making. And I really emphasize this with any like small maker I work with, right? Like start doing a little batch log, start, you know, especially if you're making it for someone else, you're gonna, you know, you're gonna really want to track it, because if something goes wrong, you're both gonna want to see what happened, where, and when, and just know all the unique things. Like if you're drying stuff and then it's like, oh, there was a rainstorm, I don't know, you know, or like the produce came in a lot wetter this time than it did the last time, and that impacted the drying time, and we saw moldy product in the end, or whatever it might be, where you're following a procedure and you're taking notes on what happens during it, and then associating a batch number to that end product is really important at any of the times. And maybe the ODA got into that and all that. And I have some like templates if anyone's interested of what I've created for our business before. But it's just a really kind of foundational practice of like, if you're doing something to track it, or track cleaning, and then, you know, that stuff as well, track holding, track dates, that kind of thing. So yeah, so Sydney's asking, would you recommend that a food hub who is considering entering the processing space go to processing school to help them learn what they might actually want to do in their hub? I would say, like, if you're really operating, you know, a full commercial kitchen and you're curious, that it could be worthwhile to attend the Better Process Control School. It's there's online versions and there's in-person versions, and it can be, I don't know what the kind of going rate is, but I want to say around $500. So it's an investment. And it's pretty, I have not done it, so I will just say that, but it's, you know, it's pretty nuanced, and you're really going over a lot of food safety. And so I wonder if there's even like a higher level way to kind of dip your toe into that. Yes, very
Yeah,
tedious. Thank you,
yeah,
Jeff.
I'm wondering if there's some sort of you know, on our last call, we had a lot of questions towards the end of the call. Folks were like, oh, we're getting excess tomatoes from our farmers. We'd love to make sauce and then sell it. And like, of course, that's where we're asking you to join this call came in. It was like,
Yeah.
we need to learn more about what the life cycle of a product looks like in the first place. But where, I mean, maybe are there places for a food hub that's like, I would like to think about co-packing. I don't know much about it. I would like to understand what kinds of products it makes sense for me to think about co-packing, which, you know, this call is helping. Like maybe acidified foods is not your first choice. Maybe it is if you've got all the equipment, but it's pretty high barrier.
Yeah, I have a kind of a rough course. I say rough because it was something we ran a few years ago. And it's not like a nice online course, but I'm happy to share it with anyone that's about co-packing and just thinking about co-packing as a whole, and kind of takes you through thinking about that. I want to find it right now, but maybe I should best, it's not popping right up. I should do that after the presentation. Oops.
I
But
would pop in for a second if you want to find that thing real quick and give a shameless plug for what Bohemia has chosen to do, which is contract. We have this in mind, like Bohemia is poising with this, the infrastructure that we're building to, of course, like, well, we should open up to that possibility, and we're contracting with Hannah now. I write her into our grants just to have her sort of on deck as we're in the early development, because she knows so much. Like, I've even learned so much in just this call, and I've already started to work with Hannah as a consultant to guide Bohemia into the co-packing space. So I really love working with Hannah, and she really knows it, because she's made the mistake, sort of like we all are doing. We're all stumbling along, and it's useful to have a program that actually doesn't exist anymore. And like, what did you learn from that? Like, huge lessons. So I really appreciate Hannah's wisdom in our group and at the table.
Thanks, Kim. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I'm really on just a heart level. Like, I'm really passionate about how we process local foods too, and just really honor those who step into doing it in whatever form, and just all you all do as food hubs. So I feel really like grateful to be in service there and learning alongside you all, and just how we can build things differently than sort of the mainstream of processing and co-packing, where, I don't know if you all really, grok this, but probably you all do because you're in this work, but like, it just hits me over and over again. I've been doing interviews of co-packers around the state for the ODA small contract I'm doing right now. And a lot of them, right, they won't work with raw agricultural products. They're just not set up to do that. They need to have them come in pureed, IQF, like they need to have them come in a form that's already processed, and that processing is scaled and at both the farming level and the processing level. And a lot of times not even like local supply chains, or, this berry farmer I mentioned, right? He works with some of those processors, the pureeing and freezing for a client of his, and the pricing's just getting, he's like, I don't know if I can make it at farming anymore. Like, like I get these kind of really bum texts from him that just depress me, because, it's like he's squished in the middle. And I think, food hubs are really creating this new opportunity way, but it's not easy work. And it's, not like the way to, not the get rich plan either. So, but Sydney, back to tomato sauce, I just sort of like realized is it could be frozen tomato sauce. It could be made and not follow like such a specific recipe, but a little bit to taste, and maybe it's green garlic and maybe it's dry, whatever, different herbs that the farmer has. Though I'm sure an end client like a school would want more of a specific finished product that they know they'd be getting consistently. But it could be frozen in bags, and that might be the way to do it for some of the clients.
That's a helpful idea. I don't want to derail your presentation, but maybe towards the end, when we get into the more open Q&A, I'd love to hear more about the processing that might be useful to happen in some of our more rural spaces, because most of our hubs are rural, to then be, to aggregate, pre-process, and then be moved to a co-packer.
Cool. I love that question. I will say I forgot I had this slide. I have 2 more slides, and I kind of feel like happy to answer that question. And hot sauce, it's actually kind of related to hot sauce. But I know a lot of makers that make hot sauce or chili oil, and they're looking for like dehydrated peppers or pepper mash too, right? So that could be frozen peppers in bulk. Peppers are just like a kind of like a hot commodity because people like those flavors, but there's definitely, linking up with that specific maker who is getting like we're growing a pepper for a maker this year under contract, and actually really we really need, it would be really amazing for her if there was someone in between that would like process the peppers, right? And I mean, like, this is like that first picture here is us like hand picking out all these peppers at the, we just pulled the plants at the end of the year and took all the red ones we had off of it. And it was like, late night situation. It was like a lot of work. And obviously a farm could like pick on the farm and you get a case of that, but you still need to pop tops. So, and that's another thing with the dried peppers is that a lot of dried peppers that folks will buy aren't destemmed. So there's destemming equipment. So yeah, I've heard a lot around the peppers, and then I feel like if anyone's heard me talk, it's like garlic is very fascinating. A lot of makers, if they're making salsa or hummus or just a whole lot of these fresher foods that can be regional, they're needing garlic, and they often will opt for like pre-peeled garlic, maybe out of California, or even like, yeah, so pre-peel, the peeling process of garlic is one of those supply chain linkages that we just don't have in Oregon really well set up. I put garlic powder here on this first one too, because I like some of the farmers that I work with, they're seeking a garlic powder co-packer. They're seeking hot sauce co-packer, back to the hot sauce slide. I've also heard of like a farm making kale chips with all the kale. Kale's been kind of this, it's like there's hot things and then not hot things in terms of what you're selling at market. And so, I guess kale's not as hot anymore, but like, when it gets processed into kale chips, people, but that's time and space intensive. People buy it up a little bit more because it's easy, ready form for them. These are some hot sauce picks from farms at the P&W CSA. And I was just blown away. I went there as a consumer to go get a CSA, and all these CSA farms had hot sauces that they were selling. And then this is a friend farm of ours down at the Sweet Fire one. Oops. In the corner. But I just noticed there's a lot of hot sauces. And I mean, if Kristen Penner is here, she could talk to us all about hot sauce. It's a fermentation process, and there's an acidified hot process. I mean, if it's shelf stable, so there's a jarring and heat treatment process associated with it. So it's like doubly complex in making it. But people love it. People love growing peppers. People are, there's like an obsession. There's so much hot sauce stuff, and sauces. Sauce is really just popular. All the different types of sauce, all the different types of peppers. It's just been kind of exploded as what I see in kind of local product maker. These are just farms doing it, right? Not even the local product makers that are making it. But this guy in the corner, he's scaled it up to a point where he's willing to drive to California with all of his peppers in his truck to go to a co-packer to get it done. I mean, they happen to have like friends there, so there's a little dual purpose, but I, just sort of makes me think where could their local food hub step in. I think the freezing of berries is really interesting as well. I don't know preserve and jam makers quite as well, but it's another one of those crops that like this, like, peppers, berries, they're, on for a month, but people want to eat and use them all year long. That's why we're preserving them. And this is sort of the life cycle, like you've been using that word, Sydney, that's so important. And like what happens with a local maker and filling in that gap of that pre-processing is local makers are working within a tight cash flow and a tight capacity. So it's really hard for many of them to say buy and preserve all the fruit that they want to use throughout the year. And I know a couple that do that, right? And they have to rent freezer pallets and they do a big cash outlay in the season and it's kind of stressful. But for the most part, right, they're buying kind of what they can and processing it for that next order, that next market. It's tight cash flow. And as they grow, maybe they can contract more with a farmer or store more or get a little bit more. But there is again an interesting opportunity. And then at the super small scales, of course, maybe a food hub isn't necessarily needed because they're just going to make a hyper seasonal product and they're like, oh, I got a bunch of these berries, I'm going to make it into something, and when it's gone, it's gone. So I think there's that kind of right sizing of things. But the maker who's trying to grow a business and have a product on the shelf of a grocery store consistently, they need consistent incoming ingredients, and oftentimes don't have the storage space for it or the cash to buy all of what that they would need for that whole year in that month or in that moment. And so their supply chain is either, shifting wildly from global to local, um, or or they just decide I'm going to get, more industrial processed ingredients, and that's just the decision they make. So I hope I expressed that and didn't just say the same thing over like 4 times.
Thank you. I think that was really helpful, and we're starting a side conversation in the
Cool.
chat right now
I
about
haven't. Great.
this seems like this sort of intermediary processing might be a really useful space for food hubs to start thinking about how they could step into. There's the cash flow problem that everybody needs to solve, but in part, food hubs are about aggregating and processing and distribution. So maybe that's where we start building the bridges to CPG. I think we've all struggled with, like, what is the bridge to CPG? What is this bridge between local production and CPG? And maybe this is where food hubs could start thinking about it.
Yeah, I wish I had like a whole slide on it because it just seems so potent what you just said.
Oh, we'll be having this conversation again, Hannah.
And I think one of those opportunities, I showed end product here, but I think dehydration and like especially herbal products is really interesting too. Local farms can grow them well and might have even perennial crops that could be kind of low barrier for them to harvest. And then what I know, this is more of like a personal thing that I'm like seeing emerging, but I know a lot of people, there's a big DIY emergence, and so many people want to make home salves or home whatever. And a lot of folks buy from Mountain Rose Herb, which is amazing. A lot of makers buy from Mountain Rose Herb, which is amazing, but they have a global supply chain, right? They have some locally sourced things, but they're moving such bulk that they can't have regional or hyper local supply chain. And so I was actually really inspired. There's a new commercial kitchen getting going in Washington because of their amazing grant system that they have up there that we need here for resilient food systems. And her focus is in part going to be on dehydrating herbs for, purchase in that kind of medium wholesale space of, makers and homemakers. But yeah, or like, seasonings and that kind of thing. So I think there's an interesting opportunity there too for food hubs or commercial kitchens. Of course, finding your outlet before you just totally dehydrate it down and know who and how people are going to find you. But there's also like a lot of apothecaries right up popping up, and we had an apothecary ask us to give them herb, and that's not, we wouldn't actually legally be able to do that wholesale to them. So that would be another place where a food hub could step in. So yeah, I haven't been following the chat. So I hope I didn't miss anything super important. But it looks exciting. Garlic
I
peelers.
think we're excited about garlic peelers right now.
Awesome. Great. And
And dehydration. We're getting a strong recommendation from Sarah Massoni about dehydration.
yes, awesome. Perfect. Great. I appreciate the confirmation. And this is, I will be very honest, I had ChatGPT make this chart, this matrix for me. I was like, here's everything I wrote up. Can you put it in a matrix? So hopefully it's actually, you know, I didn't totally check it, but Sydney and I had talked about putting a little matrix together of just sort of what would be kind of, oh yeah, it's already wrong because it says high for dehydration. So anyways, maybe I need to copy edit this and get it back to you, but I did want to try and put a little matrix together of sort of ease of entry and well, that's, yeah, maybe I think that might be wrong, but anyways. Maybe ChatGPT disagrees with me.
I think ChatGPT lied to you a little bit because we've got acidified foods as low to medium as well.
Yeah, totally. I was like, you got this wrong. So anywho, little errors here, but something to develop and and shift. Maybe I'll make it open source and welcome other people's notes and thoughts for it. But that's what I have. And I'm happy to like go down some rabbit holes or whatever feels good.
What questions do we have in this group? I love how at the end of these things, you guys are all dead silent, but like the chat's been going the whole time.
Yeah. It's so funny. Sandra, I got to taste your flatbread and pizza at Getting Recipe Market last week.
Oh, did you?
Oh,
Yeah, it was delicious. Yeah,
thank you.
really amazing texture.
Thanks.
awesome.
Yeah.
Are you getting your recipe to market, Sandra, through the Regional Food Business Center?
I just
Awesome.
finished, I did my presentation last Tuesday in front of New
Awesome.
Seasons Market.
Awesome. I love it. I love
How'd
all
it
the
go for you?
connections.
They were very impressed and we're talking about it would be great to have the roll, especially the rolls and the holidays.
Cool.
I just have to figure out how I'm gonna do it, and I need to hire somebody.
That one.
Other questions about processing?
Yeah, I mean, we have Sarah Massoni here too, so you can get
I
really
know.
nerdy with.
Although she's hiding, she's like, there's no picture of her. There's just like the most understated Massoni S. Get a question in the chat. No, we're getting good jobs. Good job, Hannah. Did we answer enough questions around how you might enter this space or how you might think about entering this space? Carrie, you were mentioning you want to start co-packing. Was there anything that this conversation triggered for you that you want to follow up on while we have Hannah here?
Yeah, I think with all the infrastructure that was funded by our OCFSN grant, I think we're underutilizing our kitchen and we're just getting started. But I think, especially with all the grant cuts, there's opportunity to utilize those kitchens for revenue streams. It's just kind of stepping into a whole new world of, how to manage the kitchen and the processes, and there's just so much crossover between product. I mean, even today we made a bone broth kit. We have a chicken bone broth kit and a beef broth bone broth kit. And we just want to make our spice packet and put it with a recipe. And so we went down this rabbit hole on like we can dry the carrots and the onions, but then we have to add the turmeric, which isn't grown locally. And at what point, like, At what point do we need to get that recipe approved? Or, it just gets really complicated super fast. We're like, we just want to make a broth kit. And what happens if we add bouillon? Then how do we
Mm.
label it? And it's just a lot of questions. It's just easier to have someone else make it.
Well, that's a kind of cool idea, if there are some of those, products that would be made in multiple regions, that you could share recipes or share things that work. But I also, totally concur with Sarah of like specialization across systems and kitchens, and what people are doing.
What do you mean by that? Do you mean just stay within the parameters of what we can do instead of trying to do everything? Is that what you mean by specialization?
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
Sarah, if you want to add what you mean by that, please.
Well, whenever you specialize in something, then you can actually spend time to be very good at it. And you can improve the amount of product you can produce because you can just focus on that one thing and just do a very good job of it instead of trying to be everything to everyone. So from a entrepreneurship standpoint, I would think of a kitchen just like I would think of somebody who has a hot sauce. So they're specializing in hot sauce. They're not making ice cream. So if your kitchen's going to be a hot sauce processor, then you would want to have all of the things to support the hot sauce people. And maybe what we would want to do for the state is look at how we could support that maybe on the west side and then support it on the east side and sort of create this redundancy so people don't have to drive more than an hour or an hour and a half to get to the co-manufacturing. This is something I've been thinking about. So
Yes.
if you're going to be blending dry ingredients, then it would be great if you had the right equipment that you might find in a spice company, right? So you would want to have the ribbon blender. You would want to have a way to apply a little bit of oil to the spices so they're not all powdery and going into the air. You might want to have the type of equipment you need to fill a small package or a small glass jar or something that would make sense, a bag. So looking at the things that Hannah put together in the chart and then say, you know what, this is something I'm excited about. This is something I can see myself doing over and over again. Because once you make a commitment, it's going to be a little bit mundane. It's really exciting planning and buying all the equipment and stuff. But once you make that expenditure for the infrastructure, you need to do it over and over and over again. So it's best to choose something that you love and become
Beautifully said.
specialized.
And something that fits in your region. I'm sure this goes without saying, but if you're
Yeah, exactly.
in a place that's not doing tomatoes, but is doing a bunch of potatoes, specializing in tomato sauce is not going to be the thing.
Yeah, I would think probably in the valley we could do tomatoes, but on the east side maybe we would do dry things, dry seeds, and maybe look at what's already being produced in the region and then scale it down so that people can start. So I think one of the hardest things to do is actually start, right? Getting started is so hard. So if we have people that are specialized in specific areas and specific processes, then that'll help people to start. And then grow the business and use the kitchens and use them as co-manufacturers if that's what people want to do.
Did that help answer some of your question or get you started on how you can think about it, Carrie?
Yeah. It's sort of my nature to just want to be everyone's solution.
I think what we need to learn to do is say no to ourselves and to others.
Yeah, Sarah. Yeah.
Crazy
Thank
thought,
you.
Sarah.
Thank you for that reminder.
That is like my biggest learning from Community Co-Pack. I think like the biggest places we went wrong was like when I was like just wanting to help, these people seeking support, and it was really outside of our scope.
It wasn't a good match. And I
Yeah.
think that comes out of desperation and wanting to be successful. So a lot of times we think, oh my God, I made this commitment there, and then not being aligned with the money that you need to come in. So you have to have like all of those pieces of yourself kind of aligned and ready to accept the cash flow and understand that it's a tool coming into you, that you need to spend it to keep things flowing. And I mean, there's a lot that goes into creating a successful business.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting too, like from the specialization factor and also a regional aspect, and like where they come into play with each other. Because one of the things we saw in going around the state, and sort of mapping food businesses, is there is a lot of like there's salsa businesses in pretty much every region because it's so fresh. I mean, in the baked goods, right? I mean, that's like hyper local to a to a market.
Yeah.
And so there's still a need for like an ability to process salsa, make baked goods. Um,
Yeah, I mean, think about the way communities used to be set up. We would have a butcher shop, we would have a bakery, we would have somebody vending vegetables and fruit, and it was just kind of intuitive that you would go, down the main street of town and pick up your groceries from all these specialized people.
yeah.
And I think that'd be kind of cool if we kind of went back to some of that.
I think probably just about anybody on this call sort of wishes that that's what that it was feasible to go back to that. I think it's kind
Yeah.
of all of our dream. Sarah,
Yeah.
thank you for bringing your expertise to this conversation. I always
Sure,
love having
Anna, you
you.
did a great job. Good job. Good job,
Thanks,
Anna.
Do we have any other questions, comments for
I do
Hannah or
want to
for
just
Sarah?
jump on what Rose was saying and really lift up that like food waste aspect. I think that's really interesting and unique, and like where a lot of both like farm direct processing comes in, but then like, yeah, where is that opportunity? And it's so it will vary so much, especially if you're like working in a market and there's a lot of creativity there. And so knowing kind of the boundaries with which you can work, right? Like bone broth kits that or soup kits that change, or, something like that, that it's like, oh, this time we have a bunch of kale. What can we do? Or we have parsley and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. What can we do? Is really interesting within the whole food waste conversation. And I know it's really alive in our community. They're working on like a second chance market. But then what happens after that? And so I really love that you're bringing that up. Or, is there, I think, like, is there a chef that would take it off everyone's hands? But it is a cool opportunity for, yeah, a co-packer or a maker as well, that is able to say, like, again, that's kind of where it's like, oh, my boundaries are I'm making preserves so I can take all the excess fruit, or I'm making shrubs so I can take the extra fruit and herbs. I'm making dried blends so I can take, and all the veg that is open to being dried, even maybe kale, because I'll make kale chips or I'll make a powdered green something or rather. But yeah, having your little avenues.
One of the tricky parts about making products that are value added from byproducts is that the product may become more popular than the amount of ingredients you have, right? So you would actually, I mean, a perfect example, and you're gonna all die when you hear this, but like craft singles, right? So those processed cheeses were made because there was an excess of real dairy cheese in storage because the USDA would pay farms to produce milk, and then they'd pay people that produce cheese to keep that whole dairy economy going. And then they had to figure out, what do we do with all this cheese that's in storage? And they blend it out and make this other kind of cheese, like the USDA cheese. That was something that we fed a lot of people with for many, many years. And that's a perfect example of commodity that turned into something that's part of our food life. Like you can go in the grocery store and you see those craft singles now. It kind of all blossomed out of excess commodity, or, needing to make something with something that we had excess of. And so byproduct and sustainability stuff can be tricky.
I didn't know that about the craft singles, Sarah. I knew about the cheese and the cheese caves and the whole story of those. But that's
Yeah.
pretty interesting.
Yeah.
We always get a good bit of trivia from Sarah.
Corey,
Other questions when we have folks on? Sorry,
Yeah.
Hannah, didn't mean to cut
That's
you
okay.
off.
I just noticed Corey went off mute.
I joined late, and I just wanted to say hi. And I haven't been here in a while, so it's fun to see the parts that I was able to see. And thanks for linking the post, the presentation. So,
Cool.
Yeah,
Definitely. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm turning 50 this year. If anyone would like to come to a big midsummer shindig, it's now seven bands and an all-day festival in St. John's. So,
What?
Wow.
oh, and here's my share. This is my cropped up.
You're funny. I was wondering what that
You
meant.
get that shirt.
Oh, I got it for my birthday or Christmas years ago. It's actually my second one because I wore it out. So
That's great to see you, Corey. It's been a while.
it has been
Happy birthday.
back. So
Funny.
All right. Other questions, or Caitlin, you're next on deck. Take it away, Caitlin. Thank you, Hannah. Thanks, Sarah, for jumping in too.
Can you guys hear me? Awesome. Cool. Thanks so much for the presentation, Hannah. That was awesome. Yeah, I just wanted to plug some upcoming workshops that I've been working on with a group. They hosted our strategic leadership workshop that we did back in April. It's Sarah and Katie, who work out of WSU Extension, and they have created a workshop series and presented that's for farm businesses. And now for us, they're translating that over to food hub businesses. So it's a lot of business support kind of workshop. We have strategic leadership, and the next one coming up is called Developing a Motivated Workforce. And I'll just pop that in the chat. It's going to be July 15th. And you can click the link to register for that workshop. We'll be recording it. So if you register and can't come, we'll share out the recording and the notes and all the materials. So that's the closest one is in July. And then we have one for every month until October. So I'll pop those in as well. And the Food Hub Network folks have total priority for registration. At some point, we'll cap registrants if that gets to be too large of a group. So please sign up and encourage Food Hub leadership and staff to attend as well. Even if you're not in a leadership position, just part of this work is to develop more leadership skills and business skills throughout all Food Hub staff. So yeah, I think that's it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Caitlin. Do we have any questions from folks for Caitlin about the programming that she's putting out on the ground? And you sent it out earlier today too, right? It's in everybody's email boxes. Cool.
Yep, it's on the listserv, and I'll send a reminder as we get closer to each one of those meetings. So you don't have to do it all right now. But yeah, July 15th is the next one.
There's a question from Hannah for you.
Yeah, at this point, I'm doing priority for Food Hub Network, and then as we get closer to the workshop, I usually post it on the OCFSN listserv if the registration's not already full. So if you know Food Hub folks, I'm trying to give priority to Food Hub folks and Oregon folks first, since the funding is for that. And then outside of that, if there's room, it'll be on the OCFSN listserv at that point.
And by Food Hub folks, we mean really folks who join this call, who participate in the Google group that is Food Hub oriented. So if you're like, I'm like Barbara, you're labeled as a farmer's market, we're not really concerned with the label of your business. It's where you participate with the network. Questions? All right, you guys. It's about 2:15. Do you want 15 minutes back in your schedule, or do you want to keep hammering Hannah and Sarah with questions? I'm reading silence says, I'd like to take a bathroom break, have some lunch, get an extra 15 minutes in my life. All right, you guys. Hannah, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. Caitlin, thank you so much for bringing everything that you're bringing to this network. It's really powerful.
Thank
Until next time, you guys.
Bye.
Cheers.
Take care.